Hello, welcome. Fright Night, Chapter 2. We're reading the book Escape from Asylum by Madeline Rue. I think it's Rue. Either way, have fun. Don't get scared. Here we go. He stared at the ceiling for hours and hours, his hands folded tightly over his stomach. His voice felt scratchy from yelling at the orderlies, and then, when that hadn't worked, from humming to himself to try and stave off of some of the anxiety. Now he was quiet. The tips of his fingers were so cold, he worried they might just freeze and grow brittle and break off. That cold had set in the second they came through the doors of the hospital, and it had been his first warning. The yard surrounding Brookline was pretty and well kept, a sturdy black fence rounding Brookline. It was the only indication that freedom to come and go depended on your status as patient or parent. Brown brick buildings chased along a U shape next to the hospital. They stood out because they were totally different construction than the hospital. Dark and old and collegiate, big word. Disheveled young men in sweater vests and corduroys ambled from one building to the next. Students preparing to leave for their summer vacations, Ricky would later learn. Next to those old buildings, Brookline was pure white, clean. Even the grass had been clipped to a perfectly even height. It had felt fake under his shoes. He remembered that. And there were patients outside in the garden, backs bent, meticulously deadheading the flowers and pruning the hedges, while orderlies in crisp uniforms looked on. Ooh. It was all pristine and picture perfect until you stepped inside. Then the cold hit you like a jolt of electricity. Drowsy as he was, Ricky was certain that he would never get a wink of real rest in this place, not even if they gave him another one of those sedative shots. He kept nodding off and snapping awake again, sure that someone on the other side of his door listening in, and his uneasy sleep was broken by a sudden scream in the night. He assumed it was night. It was difficult to tell in the shuttered cell. His limbs were leaden as he pushed into a sitting position. The scream came again and then again, forcing him fully awake. He drew up and shuffled to the door, pressing himself against the frigid surface. Ricky's hand slipped lower, coming to rest on the handle. He was shocked when it gave under that little bit of pressure. This couldn't be. He wouldn't be allowed to wander the halls at Brookline alone. He could tell from his strong-armed welcome that this wasn't that kind of place. Had the orderly screwed up and forgotten to lock him in? It was dark and still in the hallway with no nurses or orderlies in sight, no other patients, no signs of life whatsoever, except a thrum-like heartbeat that drummed low and slow from beneath his feet. Maybe it was the pipes or an old-timey furnace, grumbling below like an ancient slumbering beast. The root of the building, its core, the living, beating heart of the asylum. Ricky wandered down to the corridor and to the staircase, his bare feet as icy cold as the floor. A milky light filled the whole place, illuminating the steps as he padded down the first floor landing. The beating heart called to him, steady, as he followed. He didn't feel safe, exactly. more like reckless. What could they do? Kick him out? It wasn't his fault that those idiots had left his door unbolted. Also, he knew this was weird. The deep boom, 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 boom of the asylum's heartbeat gave him courage. It almost felt comforting. It wasn't until he reached the lobby that his anxiety returned. He had sat here just hours earlier watching Butch fill out the paperwork while his mother wept. Won't you miss me? He had murmured, giving his mom huge childlike eyes. Honey, she had almost gone for it, her lips quivering as she stared at him. No, not this again. Butch had finalized it, broken the spell, and Ricky hated him for it. Now he could feel the dread and the disbelief of that moment rise up harder and stronger, blasting over him like a wave intent on drowning him. He hurried over the doors that led out, thinking for a wild second that he'd be better off making a break for it than trying to get a hold of his mom on the phone. But his luck from before ran out. These were definitely locked. The heart or the furnace, whatever the hell was making that noise, called more insistently, and he followed once more. But reluctantly this time, nowhere to run came to mind. The song, the idea, the sound that was emanating from the basement was like the bass line of that song, climbing, driving, dark and infectious. Nowhere to run. He was in a part of the asylum that he didn't recognize. That wasn't exactly a surprise. He hadn't even been here a full day. The lobby was behind him, and the head offices and storage rooms lined a narrow hall that disappeared into a yawning mouth of darkness. An arch, an arch that led down. So down he went, into the colder and colder depths, feeling the rough stones in the walls, smelling the wormy, wet earth scent that permeated the basement. The stairs seemed to go on forever, and that steady boom, 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 boom roared louder, reverberating until it was part of him, interwoven with his dread, interwoven with the brick and mortar itself. The pipes rattled, creaked, sudden taps inside them making him wonder if they were about to burst open at any second. Searching, he was searching now. He realized not desperate to find not a phone or an exit, but the source of the heartbeat. Ricky followed the drumming all the way to a long, tall corridor, the ceiling so high above him that it may as well have been empty sky. Something scratched at his back, and when he turned to look, there was nothing there. That's when he realized he must be dreaming. When what felt like a sharp human nail scored through his shirt and burned against his skin, and still nothing was there. He was alone in the hall. He gritted his teeth against the pain and pressed on towards the heartbeat, passing windowless doors on either side of him that were shut and locked. In the nightmare, he knew he would be, but he tried each one anyway. He was suddenly sure that the screaming he'd heard earlier had been coming from this hallway. That someone behind that far door on the right had been crying out so loudly that he could hear it all the way in his room, and the heartbeat had been guiding him straight to the source. And when he reached the final door to the right, it was open, like his. More negligence, surely. He had to go inside, escape the claws scraping at his back, find the heartbeat thundering in his ears. It was his own heartbeat now, his own pulsing fear. He stopped outside the door and peered in. The scratching nails inside him now, tearing up his stomach and crawling up his throat. There was no scream and no heartbeat, just silence. Then he saw her. A little girl stood in the empty room, her nightgown tattered and soiled. She turned a slow circle around and around, but every angle Ricky caught was just long, dirty hair. There was no face beneath the hair, but somehow he felt her eyes. Her eyes were there, watching, measuring. He was a part of this place now. He had been seen. And that is going to be it for chapter 2. Join me next time for chapter 3 on Escape from Asylum. You guys have a wonderful night now. And don't forget, sweet dreams.